He arrived like a spectre, a smudge of gray and brown against the sterile white of the intake room, not with the frantic energy of a lost puppy or the bewildered sorrow of a surrendered family pet, but with a stillness that was unnerving. He was a medium-sized dog, a mutt of indeterminate origin. His coat, a patchwork quilt of neglect, matted in places, bare in others, revealing skin stretched tight over ribs that protruded like the ridges of a washboard. One ear flopped permanently, a casualty of some long-forgotten fight or accident. His eyes, deep-set and amber, held no spark, no greeting, only a profound weariness that seemed ancient. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't even flinch when the vet tech gently looped a leash around his neck. He simply existed, a vessel of quiet despair. They named him Gage, for lack of a better identifier, logged him into the cacophonous world of the county animal shelter. Kennel C12 became his domain, a cold concrete box with chain-link frontage. He was clean now, relatively speaking, the worst of the mats shaved away, revealing more scars beneath. He'd eaten, drank, and relieved himself with the mechanical obedience of an automaton. But the life force, the inherent dogness that usually radiated even from the most frightened shelter residents, was absent. Days bled into weeks. The shelter hummed with its usual rhythm of hope and heartbreak. Families came, searching for bright eyes and wagging tails. Puppies tumbled over each other, eliciting coos and laughter. Confident, friendly dogs pressed against the wire, begging for attention, their tails metronomes of optimism. Gage remained in the back corner of C12, often curled so tightly he resembled a discarded pile of rags. Potential adopters would walk the aisles, their eyes scanning, pausing, moving on. Sometimes their gaze would snag on C12. You could see the sequence of emotions play out on their faces, a flicker of curiosity, quickly replaced by pity, then a subtle recoil, an unspoken assessment. Too damaged, too old, too scared, too much. Children, unfiltered in their honesty, would sometimes point. "Mommy, look at the sad dog." Their parents would gently steer them away, murmuring platitudes about finding a happier friend. The shelter staff, hardened veterans of animal suffering, did their best. They spoke softly to Gage, slid his food bowl in without sudden movements, cleaned his kennel efficiently. They noted his lack of progress, the absence of any sign that he might connect, might heal. Whispers began, the reluctant, pragmatic discussions that haunt overcrowded shelters. "He's just not adoptable. He's shutting down. How much longer can we give him?" Gage wasn't aggressive, wasn't sick in the conventional sense, but he was fading, retreating into a place no leash or gentle word could seem to reach. He was, in every practical sense, the dog nobody wanted. His time was running out. Not marked on a calendar, perhaps, but an unspoken deadline hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He was taking up space, resources, emotional energy that could be directed towards dogs deemed more viable. He was becoming invisible, even to those paid to see him. Then she started coming. Her name was Clara. She wasn't looking to adopt, not initially. She was a retired librarian, her own life recently quieted by loss, seeking solace, not in books this time, but in offering small comforts. She volunteered, walking the more energetic dogs, socializing kittens, folding laundry. She moved with a quiet grace, her presence calming amidst the shelter's inherent chaos. She noticed Gage, of course. Everyone noticed Gage, even if only to quickly look away. But Clara didn't look away. She saw the profound stillness, the absence of hope in his amber eyes, and felt an unwelcome pang of recognition. She didn't approach his kennel directly at first. She would simply stand a few feet away during her breaks, sometimes reading aloud softly from whatever paperback she had tucked in her bag. Poetry, mostly. She wasn't reading to him, not consciously, but the rhythmic cadence of her voice seemed to be the only sound that didn't make him flinch deeper into his corner. Weeks passed. Clara became a fixture. She started talking to Gage, not expecting a response, just filling the silence around his kennel with gentle observations about the weather, or a funny thing one of the puppies did. She never tried to touch him, never pushed. She'd just sit on the concrete floor outside his kennel, a safe distance away, sharing her quiet presence. One sweltering afternoon, after a particularly noisy influx of strays had sent the shelter into overdrive, Clara found Gage trembling violently in his corner, eyes wide with a terror that felt fresh, raw. The usual weary resignation was gone, replaced by sheer panic. Something about the noise, the chaos, had cracked his fragile shell. Without thinking, Clara sat down closer than usual, right against the chain link. She didn't speak poetry this time. She just murmured, "It's okay, fella. It's just noise. It'll pass. You're safe here. You're safe." She spoke for a long time, her voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of sound. She didn't know if he heard her or understood, but she kept talking. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the trembling lessened. Gage didn't uncurl, didn't look at her, but the frantic vibration eased. Clara stayed until the shelter quieted again, until the late afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, painting stripes of light on the floor. When she finally stood up, her legs stiff, she saw Gage lift his head just an inch and watch her leave with those ancient, weary eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something. From that day, a subtle shift began. Clara continued her ritual, sitting near his kennel, talking softly. One day, she brought a small piece of boiled chicken. She didn't offer it directly, just placed it inside the kennel, near the door, and sat back. Gage ignored it for almost an hour. Then, when he thought she wasn't looking, he crept forward, snatched the morsel with lightning speed, and retreated to his corner to eat it. It was a victory, small but monumental. The next day, she placed the chicken a little closer to the front. He took it again, slowly, painstakingly, over days that stretched into another week. She moved the offering closer and closer to the wire mesh separating them, until, finally, the day came when she held the tiny piece in her open palm, resting her hand just inside the kennel door. He froze. He stared at her hand, then at her face, then back at her hand. Conflict warred in his posture, fear, ingrained distrust, battling against the primal urge for food, perhaps even a dawning flicker of curiosity about this calm, persistent human. Minutes ticked by, the shelter sounds faded into a dull roar. It was just Clara's steady breathing and Gage's internal struggle. Then, with infinite caution, he took a step forward, then another. He stretched his neck out, his scarred muzzle trembling slightly. His wet nose brushed her fingers, a tentative exploration. He snatched the chicken, quicker than thought, but this time he didn't immediately bolt back to his corner. He stayed there, inches from her hand, looking at her, really looking at her, for the first time. Clara didn't move, didn't breathe. In his amber eyes, she saw not just weariness, but a question. A fragile, tentative question. The staff started to notice. "Clara, what are you doing with Gage?" the shelter manager asked one day. Watching the quiet woman sit by the kennel of the dog everyone had mentally written off. "Just talking," Clara replied simply. "He actually took food from your hand today," a young kennel tech reported later, amazed. "I saw it." The whispers about Gage began to change. They were still cautious, but tinged with a sliver of wonder. Clara's visits became the anchor of Gage's day. He started to anticipate them. A subtle shift in his posture when he heard her voice down the corridor. Sometimes the very tip of his tail would give a single, hesitant thump against the concrete when she sat down. He started accepting gentle scratches through the wire, leaning into the touch almost involuntarily before seeming to catch himself. The true turning point, the moment that felt less like progress and more like grace, happened unexpectedly. Clara was having a difficult day herself. News from home had been unsettling, leaving her feeling adrift and melancholic. She sat by Gage's kennel, not talking much, just resting her forehead against the cool chain link, lost in her own thoughts. She felt a tentative nudge against the wire near her hand. She looked up. Gage was standing there, his head slightly cocked. He nudged the wire again, then with a soft whine, the first sound she'd ever truly heard him make beyond a fearful tremor. He tentatively licked her fingers through the mesh. It wasn't about food this time. It felt like comfort, like understanding. This broken, silent dog, the one nobody wanted, the one steeped in his own deep trauma, was offering her solace. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Not tears of sadness for herself, but tears of overwhelming emotion for this creature who, despite everything he had endured, still possessed the capacity for connection, for empathy. He had seen her sadness, and he had responded. In that instant, everything crystallized. This wasn't just volunteering anymore. This wasn't just pity or a project. This was a bond, forged slowly, patiently, in the unlikeliest of places. She stood up, wiping her eyes, and walked straight to the front desk. "I want to adopt Gage," she announced, her voice clear and steady. The shelter manager stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Gage, Clara, are you sure?" He's ... Well, he's Gage. "Yes," Clara said, a soft smile finally gracing her lips. "He's Gage, and he's coming home with me." The paperwork felt like a formality. The usual adoption counseling seemed redundant. Clara knew Gage's history, his fears, his triggers, better than anyone. The staff gathered, a small crowd of witnesses to the improbable. There were smiles, a few damp eyes. The young tech who first saw him take food from Clara's hand beamed. Walking Gage out of the shelter was another exercise in patience. He balked at the threshold, the sudden expanse of sky and open space overwhelming after months in confinement. Clara didn't pull or force him. She sat down on the pavement beside him, murmuring reassurance, until he tentatively took a step, then another, following her out of the place that had been his prison and, paradoxically, his sanctuary. The first few weeks at Clara's quiet, cozy home were challenging. Every noise made him jump. He hid under tables, avoided eye contact, ate only when she left the room. But Clara applied the same unwavering patience she'd shown at the shelter. She created safe spaces for him, established predictable routines, never pushed him beyond his comfort zone. She filled the house not with loud demands, but with the same quiet presence, the soft cadence of her voice reading aloud, the gentle offering of treats and affection, always on his terms. Slowly, miraculously, Gage began to unfurl. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or dramatic. It was a gradual revealing, like watching a tightly furled bud slowly open to the sun. The haunted look in his eyes began to soften, replaced by curiosity, then trust, and finally, a gentle warmth. The hesitant tail thumps became proper wags, tentative at first, then sweeping arcs of genuine happiness when Clara came home. He started seeking her out, resting his scarred head on her knee while she read, following her from room to room like a furry shadow. He learned the simple joys of being a dog, the pleasure of a soft bed, the delight of a squeaky toy, the quiet contentment of sunbathing in a patch of light on the living room rug. He even discovered his bark, a surprisingly deep, resonant sound reserved for squirrels bold enough to venture onto the porch railing. He would never be the boisterous, carefree dog he might have been without his past. The scars, both visible and invisible, remained. Loud noises could still send him scrambling for cover, and strange men often made him uneasy. But he was no longer the dog nobody wanted. He was Clara's dog. He was Gage, the quiet survivor, the unlikely comforter, the testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound miracles aren't loud or flashy. Sometimes a miracle is just the quiet, unwavering presence of one person who refuses to look away, who sees the worth hidden beneath the damage, and patiently waits for the soul within to feel safe enough to emerge. He was Gage, the dog who finally found his forever home, not because he became perfect, but because someone finally saw the perfectly imperfect beauty that had been there all along, waiting for a chance, waiting for a miracle, named Clara. And in finding him, Clara found a piece of her own quieted heart had healed too, warmed by the unwavering loyalty burning bright in a pair of amber eyes that once held only the world's sorrow